Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-priced commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Feathered Spy of the Gods of Kaldheim, Vega the Watcher. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. Otherwise, let's start by taking a look at the commander. Vega the Watcher is a 2/2 bird spirit with flying that costs 1, a white, and a blue with the following text. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, draw a card. Sporting a low CMC and small evasive body, this Feathered Oracle's static ability turns it into a potent draw engine for us when any spell is cast from exile, from the grave, from the deck, or even copied spells. This means cards with Flashback, Rebound, Cipher, Adventure, Foretell, Jumpstart, Retrace, and Suspend will not only give us their usual benefits from their respective keywords, but will draw us additional cards to boot so long as our commander is in play, making sure we have plenty of gas at every stage of the game so long as we keep casting them. This will allow us to go through our deck quickly as we cast more and more spells, allowing us to benefit both from the spells we cast and the cards we draw, while also enabling us to dig for pieces that we may need to deal with problematic threats or to close out the game ourselves, just as Vega has foreseen. So now that we know a little bit about the commander, let's take a look at this deck's playstyle. Clearly, our commander is built to take advantage of the many mechanics in Magic's history that allow us to cast spells from outside our hands, so we've built a Spellslinger deck that focuses on casting as many of these spells as possible and benefit us both with the casting of these spells and the card draw that our commander provides. In the early game, we'll stick to the tried and true method of ramping, mainly with mana rocks, to accelerate ourselves to the mid-game as quickly as possible. Once there, we can begin focusing on getting our spells matter and card draw matter payoffs on the field, as well as getting our commander to get our card draw engine started once we start flinging spells. Once our payoffs have been established, we'll need to focus on keeping them alive, as our opponents will do everything in their power to make sure we don't benefit from them. Thankfully, we have a veritable arsenal of cards at our disposal to hinder our opponents' attempts, along with a good number of cards that will replace themselves so long as our commander remains alive. From there, it's just a matter of time before one of two things happen. 1. We overwhelm our opponents with the sheer amount of value we've obtained from casting our spells, drowning them in tokens and card advantage to achieve victory. Or 2. We dig through our library to find one of the 3 alternate win conditions / combos we have in this deck to win the game outright or cripple our opponents severely, all but guaranteeing us our victory. So now that we have a general idea of this deck's playstyle, let's begin breaking down the deck itself by starting with the creatures. There are no CMC 1 creatures in our future, so we'll move straight into CMC 2 with Curious Homunculus, a 1/1 that can tap for a colorless that can be used to pay for instants and sorceries. Additionally, if we have 3 or more instants or sorceries in the grave, it transforms into Voracious Reader, a 3/4 with prowess that will reduce the cost of all instances and sorceries we cast by 1. Both sides provide us with ramp to cast our instants and sorceries, and the transformed side has the added benefit of temporarily getting bigger as we cast spells, making it a good offensive and defensive creature. We're also casting Lavinia Azorius Renegade, a 2/2 that prevents opponents from casting non-creature spells whose CMC is greater than the lands they control, as well as automatically countering any of their spells that had no mana spent to cast it. Lavinia's first ability generates a substantial roadblock for our opponents if they're running rocks to ramp themselves into bigger non-creature spells, while her second ability shuts down many free spells generated through Cascade, copy spell effects, and other effects. The real reason we're running Lavinia, however, is the fact that when combined with one of our artifacts, Knowledge Pool, she will prevent our opponents from casting spells for the remainder of the game. More on this combo later when we cover Knowledge Pool. The CMC 3 slot only has a single member, with Nadir Kraken, a 2/3 that we can pay 1 whenever we draw a card to give it a +1/+1 counter and create a 1/1 tentacle token. One of the payoffs we have for drawing cards, this creature will give us an ever-growing body that will also generate tokens to go wide as long as we keep our commander around. The CMC 4 slot has additional payoffs for our spell slinging in the form of Murmuring Mystic, Talrand Sky Summoner, and God Eternal Kefnet. Murmuring Mystic is a 1/5 that creates a 1/1 flying token whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, while Talrand is a 2/2 with the same effect but creates 2/2 flying tokens instead. Both of these will generate evasive bodies for us as we cast spells, allowing us to establish a board state as the game progresses. God Eternal Kefnet is a 4/5 with flying that gives us the option to reveal the first card we draw per turn and copy it if it's an instant or sorcery at a 2 mana discount. Additionally, when it's destroyed or exiled from the battlefield, instead it's placed 3rd from the top of the deck. Kefnet's first ability is fantastic, giving us potential copies of our instants and sorceries both on our and our opponent's turns if we draw on those turns. Then its second ability makes it a very sticky threat that will keep coming back over and over again. We're also running a pair of Foretell cards in this slot with Stoic Farmer and Glorious Protector. Stoic Farmer is a 3/3 with Foretell for 1 and a white that, when it ETBs, either searches our deck for a plains and puts it into our hand, or into play tapped if an opponent controls more lands than we do. A piece of land ramp that we can pay 2 and then 1 and a white on a later turn in case we're low on mana. This will usually draw us a card if it's foretold, and then we can additionally blink it with some of our spells for additional value, all of which is good for us. Glorious Protector is a 3/4 with Flying and Flash that can be foretold for 2 and a white that, when it enters the battlefield, exiles any number of our non-angel creatures until it leaves the battlefield. An excellent piece of board wipe protection for us. This Glorious Angel will definitely live up to its name by protecting us from a variety of wraths and re-triggering ETBs to boot. Moving on to the CMC 5 slot, we see another pair of payoffs with Docent of Perfection and Psychosis Crawler. Docent of Perfection is a 5/4 with Flying that creates 1/1 wizard tokens whenever we play an instant or sorcery. Then on upkeep, if we control 3 or more wizards, it transforms into Final Iteration, a 6/5 with Flying that keeps its wizard generating ability and additionally pumps all our wizards by +2/+1 and gives them flying. Another creature token payoff for our spells, which is attached to a decently sized evasive body that can then pump the tokens it creates and make them evasive as well, making Final Iteration a near perfect include in this build. Psychosis Crawler is a star whose power and toughness are equal to the number of cards we have in hand, and it deals 1 damage to all our opponents every time we draw a card. Considering the sheer amount of draw power we have at our disposal, this creature will usually be sporting a big body on top of a constant stream of burn to all our opponents as we continue to gain card advantage. Moving on to the CMC 6 slot, we have Ethereal Valkyrie, a 4/4 with Flying that, when it ETBs or attacks, draws us a card, then allows us to foretell any card in our hand for free, allowing us to play it at a 2-mana discount on a later turn. The card draw is appreciated, but the ability to foretell any card in our deck not only allows us to play them ahead of curve, but also allows us to draw cards off our commander, making it a perfect include for us. This slot also includes Guile, a 6/6 that can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures, and if we counter a spell, we exile it instead and get to play it for free. Additionally, when it dies, we shuffle it back into the library. A big and effectively unblockable body is nice, but its ability to turn all our counters into free copies of our opponent's spells is why we run this. This creature is also part of a win condition that we have in the deck alongside the enchantment Dovescape, which will make it so that our opponents will be unable to cast non-creature spells and will generate infinite 1/1 flying bird tokens for us. More on that later. In the CMC 7 slot, we have our final 2 creatures with Realm Cloaked Giant and Diluvian Primordial. Realm Cloaked Giant is a 7/7 with Vigilance and can be cast for its adventure side for 3 and 2 white to destroy all non-giant creatures at sorcery speed. A good combination of a board wipe, a big body, and a potentially card draw with our commander in play is a great addition to the deck. Diluvian Primordial is a 5/5 flyer that, when it ETBs, lets us cast an instant or sorcery from each of our opponent's graveyards for free. A big evasive body that casts us 3 spells and draws us 3 cards when it ETBs if our commander's in play. It's simply the perfect top-end creature for us in this build. Now that we have all the creatures covered, let's move on to our instants. The CMC 1 slot sees a trio of recurable spells that protect our creatures with Emerge Unscathed, Ephemerate, and Saving Grasp. Emerge Unscathed gives one of our creatures protection from a color until the end of the turn and has Rebound, which exiled it and casts it again for free on our next upkeep. This gives us a nice defensive card that can protect our creatures on our opponent's turn, and then a decent offensive spell to grant one of our creatures pseudo-unblockable to crack back into our opponent's board when it gets back to us. Ephemerate blinks one of our creatures and also has Rebound, allowing us to save a creature from target removal and re-enabling its Enter the Battlefield ability 2 more times. Saving Grasp bounces one of our creatures back to hand and can be cast again from the grave for its flashback cost of a white, making it a cheap form of protection from both target removal and board wipes. We are also running Pongify and Opt on the tail end of this slot. Pongify destroys target creature and its controller creates a 3/3 token, making it a cheap and effective form of removal in blue, which we will happily run. Opt lets us scry 1 and draw 1, giving us some low card cost selection and card draw, which is useful to us at any stage of the game. The CMC 2 slot starts us off with a suite of counterspells with Counterspell, Arcane Denial, and Dovin's Veto. Counterspell and Arcane Denial both counter anything, with the latter letting our opponent draw 2 cards and us drawing 1 on the next upkeep, while Dovin's Veto can only counter non-creature spells, but it itself can't be countered. These are all cheap and very effective, providing us with a good amount of disruption to protect our board states and prevent our opponents from gaining too much of a foothold. Then we have another pair of recurring protection spells with Center Soul and Momentary Blink. Center Soul grants target creature protection from a color until the end of the turn and has rebound, making it a more expensive copy of Emerge Unscathed, which we are running for the same reasons. Momentary Blink blinks one of our creatures and can be flashed back for 3 and a blue, having it fill the same role as Ephemerate, but with the flexibility of recasting it whenever we want instead of during our next upkeep. Some card draw comes in next with Think Twice and Radical Idea. Think Twice draws us a card and has flashback for 2 and a blue, while Radical Idea does the same but has Jumpstart instead to have us discard a card and exile it to recast it from the grave. Both are cheap instant speed draw that can be recurred, which will often draw us 2 cards on the second casting thanks to our commander. Finally, we get to the last trio of spells in this slot with Failure to Comply, Mission Briefing, and Depart the Realm. Failure to Comply is a split card, whose failure side lets us bounce a spell back to hand, and whose comply side can be cast from the grave at sorcery speed for a white to name a card and prevent said card from being played by any of our opponents until our next turn. Failure lets us bounce anything back to hand, including a spell in the stack, to prevent it from resolving, while Comply locks either the card you just bounced or a card you know your opponent has in hand for 1 more round to throw a wrench in their plans, making both sides excellent disruption tools for us. Mission Briefing lets us surveil for 2, then cast any instant or sorcery from our graveyard at full cost, giving us some card selection and recursion from some of our more desirable cards. Depart the Realm can bounce any non-land permanent back to its owner's hand, which can be foretold for a blue, giving us the option to bounce our opponents or our own permanents as needed. The CMC3 slot sees even more counters with Saw It Coming and Render Silent. Saw It Coming can counter anything and can be foretold for 1 and a blue to set up on an earlier turn if you have the mana to spare, while Render Silent also counters anything and has the added bonus of preventing an opponent from casting any additional spells for the remainder of the turn. Again, 2 efficient counter spells for that additional disruption our colors are known for. The latter half of CMC3 brings us Una's Grace and Generous Gift. Una's Grace lets us draw a card and has Retrace, which allows us to pitch a land to cast it from the grave again, giving us an additional way to draw cards in the late game if we have lands in our hand to pitch. Generous Gift destroys any permanent and gives the controller of the permanent a 3/3 token, making it a color-shifted Beast Within, which we play for the same reasons, as it's an amazing removal option for multiple types of threats. Finally, in the CMC4 slot, we have 2 more draw spells with Behold the Multiverse and Chemister's Insight. Both allow us to draw 2 cards, with the former being able to be foretold for 1 and a blue and scrying us 2 before the draw, while the latter having Jumpstart to cast from the grave at the cost of pitching a card and exiling it. We are running this for the additional card draw to keep proccing our draw and spell matter payoffs as well as our commander's ability. With the instants covered, let's move on to the sorceries. The CMC1 slot only sees Preordain, which lets us scry 2 then draw 1 for some efficient early game card selection and draw. Moving into CMC2, we have Hidden Strings and Scour All Possibilities. Hidden Strings lets us tap or untap up to 2 target permanents, then cipher it onto a creature to be cast again for free every time that creature deals combat damage. Effectively paying for itself upon cast by untapping the 2 lands used to cast it, this card can easily be ciphered onto any of our evasive creatures to be cast over and over again for the extra card draw and untapping lands or other permanents until whatever it's ciphered onto is dealt with. Scour All Possibilities lets us scry 2 then draw a card, making it a more expensive version of Preordain, but allowing us to flash it back for 4 and a blue at some point in the later game if we need the additional card draw. CMC3 is another single entry slot with Ravenform, which exiles a creature or artifact at the cost of giving the opponent a 1/1 flyer that can be foretold for a single blue. Exile removal effects are nice, and the fact that it can deal with creatures and artifacts makes it a flexible removal option that will draw us a card if foretold. The CMC4 slot starts off with a pair of draw cards with Deep Analysis and Last Thoughts. Deep Analysis draws us 2 cards and can be flashed back by paying 1 and a blue along with 3 life, giving us another recurable source of card draw for us to abuse. Last Thoughts lets us instead draw a single card and cipher it onto another creature, potentially turning it into a draw 3 with our commander in play and a draw 2 every turn afterwards so long as a ciphered creature remains alive. Then we have a pair of cards that let us play from our opponent's deck with Stolen Goods and Talent of the Telepath. Stolen Goods has target opponent exile cards from the top of their deck until they hit an on-land, which we can then cast for free, making it a wild card that could give us nothing relevant or a huge bomb and everything in between. Similarly, Talent of the Telepath has target opponent reveal the top 7 cards of their library, allowing us to pick an instant or sorcery from among them and cast them for free, or 2 if Spell Mastery is met, and then send the rest to the grave. We'll usually be able to snag 2 spells off of this thanks to the amounts of instants and sorceries we run, but do keep in mind the spell can whiff, so be sure to aim at an opponent which you know is running a lot of instants and sorceries. Last in this slot we have Divine Reckoning, which has each player choose a creature they control and destroy the rest. That can then be flashed back later for 5 and 2 white, making it a recurable board wipe that can help us take control of the board multiple times. CMC 5 gives us another board wipe with Doomscar, which destroys all creatures and can be foretold for 1 and 2 white, making it a really cheap board wipe to cast if foretold to immediately start rebuilding our board. The CMC 6 slot then gives us another board wipe with Spectral Deluge, which bounces all our opponent's creatures with toughness X or less, X being the number of islands we control, which can also be foretold for 1 and 2 blue. A one-sided board wipe for our opponent's creatures that can be foretold on the cheap is again another perfect addition to our board wipe suite. Finally, we reach our CMC 7 slot with our last entry and one of our win conditions, Approach of the Second Sun. This spell gains us 7 life, then places itself 7th from the top of our deck on the first time we play it, then the next time we cast it from our hand, we win the game. We have a decent amount of card draw in this deck, so we can easily get this card back to hand a turn or two after casting it, making it a great alternate win con for us, but do keep in mind that this card has to be cast from the hand in order for us to win the game. Any other effects that let us cast cards from the top of our deck, grave, or otherwise will just gain us 7 life and set it 7 from the top again, so do be wary of this. With sorceries done, let's move on to enchantments. Moving right into the CMC 2 slot, we have a pair of draw payoffs with Ominous Seas and Hoofprints of the Stag. Ominous Seas has us put a counter on it every time we draw a card, allowing us to remove 8 counters from it to create an 8/8 Kraken token. Again, with the card draw provided by our commander, we can easily generate tokens for this, and since the Krakens can be created at instant speed, we can quickly rebuild our boards after board wipes, create surprise blockers, or just drop more big bodies on the board for extra pressure. Hoofprints of the Stag also gets a counter for each card we draw, but this time we can have 4 counters removed to get a 4/4 flyer, though we do need to pay 2 and a white to activate this ability. Though not free like Ominous Seas, it does give us a decently sized evasive body to get over blockers and can easily stack counters, again due to our card draw. Skipping to the CMC 5 slot, we have Future Sight and Metallurgic Summonings. Future Sight simply has us play with the top card of our library revealed and lets us play cards from the top of our library, turning every spell we cast from the top of our deck into draw alongside our commander, which is why we're running it. Metallurgic Summonings creates an XX artifact token every time we cast an instant or sorcery, with X being equal to that spell's CMC. We can also pay 3 and 2 blue and exile it to return all instants and sorceries from our grave to our hand, though we do need to control 6 or more artifacts in order to activate this ability. Yet another form of generating us tokens through our spell slugging with the added utility of returning spells to our hand in case it's needed. Finally, in the CMC 6 slot, we have our last enchantment and other half of our win condition alongside Guile with Dovescape, which automatically counters any non-creature spell any player plays, and then gives that player X 1/1 flying bird tokens, X being equal to the CMC of the spell. On its own, this card makes players be unable to cast non-creature spells anymore, giving them 1/1 flyers instead, which is a bit disruptive but not too impressive. Coupled with Guile, however, it creates the following interaction. If Guile and Dovescape are in play at the same time, whenever anyone tries to cast a non-creature spell, the spell is countered by Dovescape, giving whoever casts a spell the bird tokens, then Guile's effect to exile the spell instead of countering it comes in, allowing us to cast it for free, which Dovescape will then counter again, giving us the bird tokens and triggering Guile again to cast the spell again, continuing until we decide to stop casting the spell, effectively giving us infinite 1/1 flyers and leaving our opponents to deal with both pieces of the combo with only their creatures. While this does not immediately win the game for us, unless our opponents find a way to destroy the combo via their creatures or a way to clear the board, we will win as soon as we're able to swing out with our infinite army of birds. That's enchantments done, so let's move on to artifacts. The CMC 1 slot only has a single entrant with Soul Ring, which taps for 2 colorless. We're running it because it's the best mana rock in our format. Moving on to the CMC 2 slot, we run down another string of mana rocks, starting with Arcane Signet, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity. Azorius Signet, which we can pay 1 and tap to generate a white and a blue. Marble Diamond and Sky Diamond, which tap for a white and blue respectively and come into play tapped. Mind Stone, which taps for a colorless and we can pay 1 and sack to draw a card. Prismatic Lens, which taps for a colorless and we can pay 1 and tap to generate a mana of any color. And finally Thought Vessel, which taps for a colorless and removes our maximum hand size limit. CMC 3 sees only one entrant with Chaos Wand, which we can pay 4 and tap to exile cards off the top of our opponent's deck until we hit an instant or sorcery, which we can then cast for free, sending all other cards exiled in this manner to the bottom of their library. Again, another card that lets us get some value out of our opponent's deck and often draws us a card. Just be sure to target an opponent who you know is running a lot of big spells. Then, in the CMC 6 slot, we have the other half of our second win con alongside Lavinia Azorius Renegade, which is Knowledge Pool. When Knowledge Pool comes into play, each player exiles the top 3 cards of their deck. Then, whenever anyone casts a spell, that spell becomes exiled from the stack, causing it not to resolve. Then that player plays a spell that's been exiled previously with Knowledge Pool other than the spell they just exiled. On its own, Knowledge Pool just lets us draw cards whenever we cast a spell thanks to our commander's ability, but alongside Lavinia, the following interaction happens. Whenever anyone other than us tries to cast anything, Knowledge Pool exiles the card, and they pick a new card to cast from the Knowledge Pool. Since they did not spend mana to cast a spell, however, it's automatically countered by Lavinia, resulting in no one but us being able to cast spells for the remainder of the game, unless the combo can be broken with whatever our opponents already have in play. Again, not an instant win condition for us, but our opponents will have an uphill battle unless they've already have an established board state. That's artifacts done, so let's take a look at our Planeswalkers. Only one Planeswalker joins us in the CMC3 slot, which is Narset, Parter of Veils. Narset comes into play with 5 loyalty counters and has a static ability that prevents our opponents from drawing more than 1 card per turn, effectively shutting down any draw engines unless she's dealt with. Additionally, her -2 lets us look at the top 4 cards of our deck and put a non-creature, non-land from among them into our hand after revealing it, putting the rest at the bottom of the deck in a random order, letting us look for answers or combo pieces by digging deeper into our deck. A powerful card, no doubt, but be aware that our opponents will stop at nothing to get her off the board as soon as possible, as her static draw-limiting ability is just that oppressive. That's Planeswalkers covered, so let's move on to the land base. Quickly running down the mana lands we have, we start with Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity. Prairie Stream, which taps for either of our colors but comes into play tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. Port Town, which taps for either of our colors and comes into play tapped unless we reveal a plains or island from our hand when it ETBs. Skycloud Expanse, which we can pay 1 and tap to generate both of our colors. Azorius Chancery, which taps for both of our colors but comes into play tapped and bounces one of our other lands back to hand. Irrigated Farmland, which taps for either of our colors, comes into play tapped and can be cycled for 2. Temple of Enlightenment, which taps for either of our colors and comes into play tapped but scries 1 when it ETBs. Myriad Landscape, which taps for a colorless, comes into play tapped, and we can pay 2 and sack to put 2 of the same basic land from our deck into play tapped. And finally, Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both which can be tapped and sacked to search out a basic land from our deck and put into play tapped. For utility lands, we're running Gates of Icefeld, Ghost Quarter, and Scavenger Grounds. Gates of Icefeld comes into play tapped, taps for a white, and we can pay 2, 1 white, and 2 blue to tap it and sack it to draw 2 cards and gain 2 life. Not the greatest rate for card draw, but it's on a land which we can slot in for minimal investment, so we'll take it. Ghost Quarter taps for a colorless and can be tapped and sacked to destroy target land, giving us some spot removal for our opponent's utility lands, though they do get to replace it with a basic. Scavenger Grounds also taps for a colorless, and we can pay 2, tap it and sack it to exile all cards from all graveyards, providing us with some graveyard hate to combat graveyard-focused decks. Finally, we're running Reliquary Tower, which taps for a colorless and removes our maximum hand size, giving us some extra room in our hand for all the cards that we'll be drawing. For basics, we'll be running 14 islands and 8 plains. With lands covered, let's take a look at the breakdown. This deck currently has 15 creatures including the commander, 21 instants, 12 sorceries, 5 enchantments, 10 artifacts, 1 planeswalker, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 28 cards that can be cast from outside our hand or enable us to do so, 4 cards that can be cast from our opponent's decks and graveyards, 4 cards that care about card draw, and 5 cards that care about instants and sorceries being cast. This gives us a wide array of cards that allow our commander to draw us extra cards, as well as a number of payoffs for both drawing said cards and playing those spells in the first place. For general deck stats, we have 11 ramp sources, 14 card draw sources, 5 counters, 5 targeted removal sources, and 4 board wipes. Ramp is at a fairly typical number, while the card draw is a bit higher than normal, but since we have several payoffs for this, the higher number we have is fine. The counters and target removal are both good at that number, giving us a fair amount of disruption to hamper our opponents, along with a handful of board wipes to reset the board as necessary. Looking at our mana curve, we have 7 1-drops, 22 2-drops, 10 3-drops, 12 4-drops, 5 5-drops, 5 6-drops, and 3 7-drops, giving us a mid-weight curve with a couple of expensive combo or standalone finishers to help us close out games. Currently, this deck is valued at $61.69, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price has been calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For some side grades, if we want to be able to cast more cards off the top of our deck, we can add a Magus of the Future to play any cards off the top, and Precognition Field to play instants and sorceries only, but giving us the option to exile the top card away if we don't want it. Adding some additional suspend cards could also work for us, with Deep Sea Kraken being a 6/6 unblockable creature that comes into play surprisingly quickly, Aeon Chronicler to give us even more card draw, and Chronomatic Escape for a mini Teferi's protection every 3 turns. Finally, Giant Killer and Sen's Enlistment can be added for additional removal and token creation respectively that mesh well with our commander. For upgrades, we can add Ancestral Vision as additional card draw with Suspend to draw us up to 4 cards alongside our commander. Torrential Gearhulk and Snapcaster Mage would also be good additions to get additional value out of the spells in our graveyard. Thanks everyone for sticking to the end of the video. I'm sorry this one came out a little bit later than usual, but due to some unforeseen circumstances I was unable to post it on Saturday. I hope everyone's enjoying the new audio quality courtesy of my new Blue Yeti mic, which from what I can tell is miles better than the previous setup, but be sure to give me your feedback in the comments below. I have a few announcements regarding your requests for upcoming Cut Rate Commander videos. Moving forward, I'll be giving a preview of the next commander I'll be making a video on in the closing thoughts section here, in this case being Cole the Forge Master as requested by Jerry Huso. Additionally, in an effort to keep things orderly, I'll be giving viewers a selection of commanders to choose from for the next upcoming video that they can vote for in the comments. This time around, the commanders that we have lined up are Maja, Bredeguard Protector, Svela, Ice Shaper, and Frigga, Judge of Valor. Post who you want to see a deck built around in the comments below, and we'll tally up the votes and announce the results at the end of the next video. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.